Everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee with the Critters, where we live every Sunday morning here on the Animal Behavior Center's Facebook page. When we have a guest on, like we do today, we live stream at 9 a.m. to give you a full hour of content. When we're discussing topics without guests, I will live stream at 9:30 a.m. Eastern every Sunday morning. And next Sunday, you're going to want to make sure you stay tuned because I will be live streaming with some animal. I'm trying to figure that out, but I will live stream some training information or enrichment with you. So, good morning. If you're new to Coffee with the Critters, my name is Laura Joseph. My name is Laura Joseph, owner of the Animal Behavior Center. We're an international educational center where we live stream our services to people all over the world. Some of our services are free, like Coffee with the Critters. Our other services where we go more in depth are our annual memberships, where people join a membership for the year. And in those memberships, it includes live streaming of our training, demonstrations of enrichment, monthly Q&As to help keep you on track all year long. So we empower animals all over the world and the people that care for them. And you can always reach me on my email address, laura@theanimalbehaviorcenter.com. And that's LARA. You can also keep in touch with the events we're having. Right now, we're scheduling our fall workshops, zoo training workshops, to expand your application and knowledge of using applied behavior analysis with a variety of species of animals. You can follow and keep track of our workshops on our website or here on our Facebook page under events. And to be sure to be notified of those upcoming workshops and online webinars, seminars, you can sign up to our email newsletter list, which is here on our Facebook page or on our website. So without further ado, I am joined today by the amazing, Samantha Sarin. I'm trying to get something off my screen. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and bring you on, Samantha. So Samantha is a returning guest. And thank you so much for coming on again today, Samantha. You're one of my favorite people to have on here because it's like brain candy for me.
So you put that in the description. Thank you for having me again.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So let me introduce you for those that may be new to this live stream. Samantha Sarin is a board certified behavior analyst. Samantha began in the human services field over 15 years ago, working with child and adult learners with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autism, in a variety of settings. She is especially interested in environmental modifications and natural environment functional analysis. She is currently employed with Gamut Early Intervention Services and serves as an adjunct faculty at Rider University. She has been board certified for 10 years and is an animal lover, has been an animal lover since birth. Her first word was EO for Leo, her cat growing up. She is a fur mom to 5 cats and 1 dog. So welcome again, Samantha. And also, you were recently involved in a study. I'm trying to read it here. Owner implemented paired stimulus food preference assessments for companion dogs. Do you want to mention something about that? I know I have this study printed out and sitting on my desk at work to read, and I will share a link with the viewers of this study after the live stream is over.
Absolutely. So before we go even into anything, I always have to give my disclaimer that my area of practice is with humans, not with animals. So I join you very much as a guest, but I'm obviously super comfortable talking about the principles of applied behavior analysis and then extending that application. For this, so this study was awesome. I forget how I came across it, but the author was Mindy Waite, and it's super cool that you're sharing it to get the research out there. Took a look at working to see if your dog essentially could demonstrate an established preference. So presenting different treats, and there was a whole protocol that we went through, that the authors trained us on how to do, to present the treats to allow the dog to make a selection. And I think one of the most interesting points that they talk about in the study, which just got published, we did it, I think, 3 years ago. So it just got published, just came out. And they talk about how the owners actually, I think it was 8 of the 10 owners, one being myself included, predicted incorrectly what the dog's preference would be. So we had to select a number of treats to use for the study, and we gave our guess as to which would be the highest, preferred. And I actually picked totally backwards for Olivia. So that was super interesting, and I think, potentially speaks volumes, as far as the work that you're doing and with empowering the animals and giving them choice, because it's not always what we think is going on. So teaching our animals ways to communicate so that they can actually get their needs met is very important.
I love that. Absolutely. So interesting that the treats that you or the reinforcers you thought were going to be highest valued were not.
Yeah, they actually wound up being lowest.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Was that due to environmental changes?
I don't think so. I think it was marshmallows that I thought would be the highest. And like, my cats love marshmallows. But
because they're healthy.
Yeah. Listen, I joke that I work with people because I reinforce everything for my babies.
I'm just messing with you.
No problems, withholding or keeping a straight face or doing whatever, working with humans, but cat or dog starts whimpering a little bit. I'm like, here, have whatever, so.
No, we always joke around the center, like, okay, we got to find a high valued reinforcer. And somebody in the background will say goldfish crackers. And I'm like, that's not healthy, but we use it. If it works.
I remember Olivia's vet behaviorist asked me one night, because Olivia started this weird habit where she was getting up in the middle of the night, and her vet behaviorist was like, well, do you think you can just ignore her? And I'm like, yeah, of course I can. And then nighttime rolls around and I hear, and I'm like, okay. And then I hear, I'm like, what do you want? So that was very short-lived.
Daniela asked, did preferences change from day to day?
Not for Olivia. Her responding was pretty consistent. But I mean, I was just a participant in the study, just a participant. The authors are Mindy Waite and Tiffany Kodak. Laura said she's going to post the link for you guys to check out. It was a very, very cool study. And I believe Mindy's going to be doing more research. So for those of you that have dogs and would be interested in participating, keep your eyes out for things that are coming. So I'm sure she could always use.
Yeah. Now I'm even more excited to read this study. So Samantha has been here before at the Animal Behavior Center for a workshop. And that was a fun, great, fabulous. We had a lot of fun, and I think you ended up picking a favored animal you worked with. Rocky, who's still alive and thriving, and I think he's 25 now. I think we're getting ready to celebrate his 26th birthday this October. So today, Samantha and I are going to talk about the many uses of targeting to modify behavior, to teach new behaviors, and even more. I have a lot of photos that I can show that I've pulled from my photo album on different behaviors that I get through targeting. I think a lot of people, well, let's just start off with the definition of targeting. Okay. Do you want to do that? Do I want to do that? Or do we both want to do that?
why don't you do that? Because I would say it's more unique to animal.
Okay.
And we'll talk about that obviously as we, go through.
Okay. When I explain target training, because a lot of people think it's just one thing, but it's numerous things. It's when you ask an animal to touch a particular body part to an object on cue. And we use it to get animals to come to us on cue, recall training, turn around, put their head in certain positions, put their bodies in different positions, return to enclosures. And as Samantha and I get discussing about this, I will show photos of different array and complexities in target training. And I bet you a lot of you're using target training and you don't even realize it. So, I'll just show a basic target training an animal. It's not always the first thing we train, but it's one of the first things we train because it's a great communication tool to teach the animal contingencies, meaning if this, then this. And it teaches animals, whenever I do something that you ask, not command, we don't use commands. When we request an animal to do something, we make sure there's something of value in it for the animal. So we don't have to use force, and the animal becomes an active, extremely willing, empowered participant. So a lot of times we'll start targeting with just the nose, the beak, the eyes. So Samantha, do you want to start talking about targeting on your end of work?
Sure. So I've been racking my brain for a couple days actually since you proposed this as the topic, because there's not really a direct translation for working with people. Like we don't use target training, right? Like I've been a guest on previous episodes where we've talked about things that like we do use shaping, we do use positive, negative reinforcement, but there's not necessarily a targeting procedure, so to speak. But I was thinking about it in terms of how, I would say that the ability to target, it would be sort of a foundational skill for an animal. So once they're able to do that, then you can build upon that and you can use it in so many different ways. And we certainly have, plenty of those as people, right? So in terms of just like sort of baseline abilities, we have behaviors like walking, talking, reading, being able to, sort of those in terms of like physical behaviors. And then you go to more sort of advanced social capabilities where we're talking about things like joint attention. So can someone else and myself pay attention or focus on the same thing at the same time? Can someone wait for something? Can they delay gratification? So all of these sort of what we would say are like foundational skills that once they're able to do that, then there's all these other things that they can do. And that, I think that for me was the connection that I've reached with thinking about targeting for animals. It sort of opens the door, if you will, to so many other opportunities to access reinforcement.
Okay. And this is one of the reasons why, because some people who just think I'm an animal trainer, I love to focus on behavior, how behavior works in different environments, no matter what the species. And this is why I have guests like you, Joel Vidovic, because you work with people. A lot of my work is focused on animals just to see how the science comes together, and it's about the science of behavior, its foundations, how it works. So I'd love to hear more examples or more input. Do you want me to show a photo of one of several different ways in how we use targeting?
If you want to, that's cool. I was also thinking about, so as I was looking up some to see what sort of research was out there on this, I actually came across one of your publications, if you will, like whatever. I think you posted it on something. It was from 2016. I was like, oh, look at this. And it was your 11 reasons to teach targeting.
I don't even remember that. But.
I was like, oh, look at this. I'm looking for information to talk with Laura, and I found Laura's information. So, but you had a couple of the things that I thought that you put in there that there's definitely overlap was the concept of building a baseline, having a form of communication. And then you also talked about rapport building in there. I don't think you use that terminology. That's probably that's like a humanistic term, the rapport building. But again, obviously goes across establishing that relationship with whoever it is you're working with, whether it be a giraffe or a small child.
I told you I had my photos ready.
Look what we did there. That was so smooth.
Rapport building. It's great because, and it goes back to first interactions between me and this individual, teaching the individual, no matter what your history is with other people, I'm unique, I'm an individual, and it teaches the animal that, yes, every time you touch the target, there is something of value in it for you. Whereas past contingencies may have been numerous or aversives, where I'm teaching the animal, it builds trust because through this type of communication, I'm teaching the animal, I am not going to force you to do anything. And a really cool thing when I'm working with an animal is when I see the animal say, no, I am not comfortable, and how the animal sees what I do next. I let the animal know, I see that you are not comfortable with this situation, and we're going to stop, or we're going to go back to an area where you are comfortable. And I love those moments working with animals, because then I don't want to anthropomorphize. I see like relax and then get more interested in interacting with me, because I understood what it was telling me through behavior. And then when working with this kind of interaction, I will find that if the animal gets in a fearful state, in an environment where it's not comfortable with something, that through working with me, even if this is a situation where I'm not trying to intentionally work with the animal, if something happens where the animal is not comfortable and the animal runs to me for whatever reason, you know what I mean? I'm assuming it's because it has a past history of me of understanding that I'm not going to put it in fearful situations.
Absolutely. And it is, you said you didn't want to anthropomorphize. It's interesting because like we would, people would say, oh, that's trust, right? Which is that sort of term, but that's what that means. It's that consistent, that established learning history of consistency. So it's, I know what to expect here. I know what is going to be the outcome, and that feels safe, right?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that the animal is running towards me because it feels safe, because of that working history with me. And I see that in so many animals, especially the ones that I start working with, that, and I've been asked to train certain animals that I'm just like, you righty. Because I know this animal's history. It's been described to me as an aggressive animal. Yep. And those are some of my favorite animals to work with, because a lot of times they're labeled inappropriately. And when you start digging into training the animal, you see that, the reasons why it may have been labeled as aggressive, because it's been interacted with unpredictably from person to person. It's been forced. There's very few times have I had to force an animal to do something. And it's usually because the consequence of not using force in that particular moment is worse.
Worse. Mm-hmm.
Yep, something's going to get hurt. So I'll go, boom, capture the animal. And I'm just like, I've got a working history with you where I know we can recover from this quickly.
I've been working in a middle and high school for the past year with a lot of emotionally disturbed youth, and it's similar in a sense to what you're saying, where you people are asking, oh, I need you to work with this animal. They're aggressive. They aren't doing anything, that we can't get them to do anything. It's the same sort of like behavioral presentation, if you will, that we see with these emotionally disturbed youth. They have such an inconsistent learning history, or a lot of times there's trauma involved, and their behaviors may not obviously make sense, right? Or you're like, I don't know why they're doing that. But then you dig deeper and you start to figure things out, and it is what you were saying with the animal. Like when the animal says no, it's super empowering. You see the same sort of thing with this population, where they're expecting that you're gonna be forceful or demand compliance, and sometimes when you just listen and you don't necessarily push the issue, or you go about it in a certain way that they're not used to, and then you see that change in their response, and it's like, okay, so yes, you're responding to me this way now, which is what I would expect, but your history of responding has been this, so things make sense, and then you're able to actually help.
Yeah. We have a question, it looks like for both of us, from Allie Furman. I'm taking Allie.
I do know Allie.
So Allie says, what is your take on positive punishment when working with animals? And then she asks Samantha, so I'm assuming the first part is for me?
Probably. We've had this conversation.
My take on using positive punishment when working with animals, I will not use it if possible. There's other things that I can do because I know the consequences of using aversives to control behavior. And I know they can cause other behavior concerns by using them. So, like I always say, when we know better, we do better. If I have to, I will, when the alternative of not using it is worse at that particular time. But I also note that if I find myself having to use force and aversive to control behavior at that particular time, note to self, this needs training. Do not do this again. Even if I have to use it intermittently, I know it could cause behavior issues, concerns to become very strong. So Allie asks you, Samantha, what kind of reinforcement punishment have you found to be most effective when working with children with emotional disturbance trauma?
So before I get into my answer, to add to yours, Laura, you were answering that, I think, when you're saying, when the result of not intervening, right, is greater, or the outcome of not intervening is worse than the intervention, would be sort of a justification for that more restrictive way of intervening. So out of like medical necessity or safety, and that's sort of how we look at things too in terms of punishment when working with people. There has to be a really strong justification. And then one of the other things that I remember that you had talked about, I think when I was up there for the workshop, and it's always stuck with me, is like putting it on cue when you have to, right? So it's not out of nowhere. And I think that I was probably guilty of this in terms of like, when I have to give medications, I will try to like sneak or like have treats out, and then, oh, you're coming for the treats, gotcha. And then I would always give the treats, of course, but not realizing that then establishes the presentation of treats could mean punishment coming. So now I just like, I'll show the medicine, or I'll make sure they know that I'm gonna grab you and pill you or whatever, but so that it is on cue, so that they don't think if I'm coming up to them to pet them that it's going to be this quick capture. So I think
Yeah.
IQ is like a very, when you have to use procedures like that to be very clear and deliberate with it is more, is humane for the whoever's being worked with.
Yeah, in that particular instance, I believe you were here right after Cello, our roller pigeon, was injured and had a toe bitten off. And I did not have him trained to accept medication. So he went in for surgery, had the toe removed. And it was the advice given to me was do not let him out of this crate for so many days until his toe heals. So if you use aversives with pigeons, they will kind of punch you with their wing. They come at you sideways and bam, hit you. And that's what Cello was doing. And Cello had, if any history of me using aversives to control his behavior, he probably forgot about them because I didn't use them. If I did use them. So what I was finding out was like, okay, this pigeon is in the small cage. His choices are extremely limited. I never trained him to accept medication. And I tried the training and it wasn't going as fast as what it needed to be. So what I was doing is I came in one time and I just captured him, gave him meds, put him back in his crate. Well, then I came in to try to train him and he would punch me. So I was like, I need to put this aversive on cue so he knows what I'm getting ready to do. So my cue was this: I'm going to capture you. And then when I came in to train him, the wing punching stopped. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So to Allie's question, I think that, and this is sort of related to what we've been talking about, the process of pairing. So with kids that are emotionally disturbed, I would say that the relationship that you form with them is the most critical. And I would say that is more reinforcing than anything that you'd sort of be able to deliver arbitrarily or environmentally, because these kids have such a complicated background and inability to even form that relationship, that if you're able to be effective in working with them, then that in itself to them is valuable. They have this person that they know is going to respond this way regardless of what's going on. That is going to be available under these conditions. That's not going to be available under these conditions. That, that I think that consistency is super, super critical. And then again, that's sort of what we talk about as trust. So they learn to know what to expect, and then can start actually adjusting their own behavior accordingly in a healthy way for sometimes the first time, unfortunately for a lot of these kids.
And you mentioned with you talking about that, it makes me think that so these children become, you probably, the opportunity to interact with you, to be in the vicinity of you, is probably becomes a highly valued reinforcer because you understand. And I guess, and this happens on my end too, but probably more so on your end where, and I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong, where, okay, this interaction is consistent with you, but what about the rest of the people in their environment? How do you get that through, and do they want to learn? Do they want to understand?
I mean, that is always a struggle. And that's sort of just something I would say is never going to be under any one person's control. That's going to be just a variable, right? Like we can't control how everybody else in the environment responds. Even let's say we had, a team in place that everybody was super invested and on board, and, we did integrity checks and things were on point. There's still the chance that somebody doesn't, respond the right way, so to speak, or there's the whole world outside of that you certainly have no control over. But I think once they're able to have that consistency with one person, people learn to discriminate. They learn, okay, this is this way with this person, this is not this way with this person, or this is this way in this setting, but it's not this way in this setting. And once they can establish that, then their expectations would match. So they wouldn't necessarily be looking for the same sort of predictability outside of circumstances where, they've learned it.
Yeah.
We can't. That's not how the world works. Like, I don't walk, I don't, walk about and think that everybody's going to give me the responses and things that I want all the time. That would be nice, but
right.
it's certainly not the case.
And that happens within the animal world as well, where I will see an animal discriminate between me and numerous other people. And a lot of people laugh at me because I always wear my keys on my pants and it smacks up against my radio and it makes a very distinctive cue. So the animals know, oh, the deliverer of awesomeness is coming.
That's like your little theme jingle.
Deliver awesomeness. Yeah, I am not going to force you. That's their cue that training's getting ready to happen. And a lot of times in training is communication. And a lot of times when I see numerous different species of animals hear that cue coming, they will run to stations and wait for me. And I love seeing that kind of engagement because it shows me that the animal is empowered. It does have choices within its environment. And as I continue to know you, I'm going to continue to shape complexities through choice in your environment to empower the hell out of you, you know what I mean? People love seeing animals thrive. I know that studies show if you're actually using positive reinforcement training, it's the animal's preferred form of enrichment. I know that because I see it every single day. And I'm sure you see it with people as well.
Absolutely. You see who kids go up to and who they spend time with, and who they want to be around when they're in a crisis, and who they don't want to be around, when they're in a crisis. And there's reasons for that. It's not random.
Yep. So that's the reason why I train, because I want that effective form of communication, empowering the animal. This was a goat named Feta that I trained in a workshop in a workshop many years ago, and I was demonstrating, and we had the whole workshop involved on all the uses of targets. And I do this a lot. We used the target. We taught a nose target. Then we taught the goat to jump onto this. I don't even remember what it was. And then I was like, okay, from here, how can we increase complexity? So we taught the goat to stand up on its back feet through targeting. A lot of times, like right now, I'm working with a pair of timber wolves. I'm just in the beginning stages. I don't want the animals jumping on the side of the cage, because if that protective contact moves to full contact, I don't want this behavior of jumping to be reinforced unless it's on cue, because it could put me in a dangerous situation.
Predicament, for sure.
Yeah. So when I see the wolves jumping on the side, just no reinforcement is delivered. So what I'll do is cue them to do another behavior where all 4 feet are targeted to the floor. Once I see all 4 feet on the floor, bam, reinforcement is delivered. And we also do this to give injections. And Samantha, I wonder, because I was thinking about this, I do this a lot with prepping animals for the veterinary exam. And actually, it was Daphne Robert Hamilton that suggested that to me. Was she in that workshop? I can't remember.
I think so. There was a Daphne, and I believe that's who it was. She's a dog trainer.
Yep, she's a dog trainer from Idaho.
I think so.
So we were working with a dog, and she's sick. Well, we were working with Quincy
Oh.
and to prepare for the veterinary exam. And I was having a situation where every time I was getting Quincy to station, which is a target with duration, I want all 4 feet right here, and I need them to stay right there while I walk behind you. And I think I put myself in a situation where Quincy kept turning around to see where I was going because I was taking too big of steps in shaping. And Daphne stood up and suggested teaching. I think we actually did a group training session with this where we were teaching Quincy. I don't know if it was my water bottle, but to focus, target her eyes to that water bottle. When you target your eyes to that water bottle, and then I start shaping the behavior of moving around you. Do you ever use like our eye targeting students or children's eyes to you or to particular object? To, I mean, if targeting their eye, if eye contact with you is an aversive, can you target their eyes? I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, so one of the, it's very characteristic, right, for individuals with on the autism spectrum to avoid eye contact. So that is something that we would work on actually them establishing that eye contact, and reinforcing accordingly. And the same sort of way that you're saying, where we would start with just very briefly, just quick look, and then, you know, reinforce and work on extending that duration. That's funny that you asked that, because that was one of the things that I was thinking of in terms of like more a clearer translation of targeting for individuals. And I was thinking like maybe eye contact would be a good example of that, you know, with people. I like that you were talking about stationing, because I thought about that also, which is targeting, right? But it's sort of like extended or prolonged targeting. So I need to touch this or locate here and then stay here. And that has been super useful with Olivia for me. I was thinking when you were talking about the wolves jumping up, Olivia, for whatever reason, she's very habitual, right? She's an anxious dog, so she, you know, finds relief in routines. So sometimes she'll do something, and it's you know, reinforced just spontaneously or whatever, but then it becomes a thing. So she started where to go outside, she would jump up and claw at the door, and then this turned into like clawing at my wall. And I still have, I just like keep dry, like spackle nearby. I'm like, all right, prepare. And I'm like, Samantha, this is ridiculous. Like, this is what you do for a living, and your dog is, you know, tearing up your wall. So I was like, I need to get her to like what's incompatible with this, right? And it wound up being a combination of response prevention. So where I would sort of put my hand in front or block essentially, without even contact, because she wouldn't, as soon as she saw my hand there, she would stop. But then also like having a spot for her on the floor where she would go to while I opened the door, so that there wasn't that I jump up and she was just doing it out of excitement. So that's thankfully gotten better. I haven't had to spackle the wall in some time, but I basically used stationing to do that.
Differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior.
Yes,
yep.
Absolutely. Like if I'm sitting here, I can't be jumping and clawing the door.
Yep. And here's an example, I have it right here, of using differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior to, this is also a target, and I guess it could be a station, where I taught Coco. Coco is a 50-plus-year-old umbrella cockatoo that we adopted 7 years ago that has a history of abnormal repetitive behaviors, and you can see that when environmental stressors happen, he will go into those abnormal repetitive behaviors, and you can usually tell I don't want to say how long those ARBs have been reinforced, but you can tell when they have been well practiced. Um, so Coco had a history of a lot of things. And one was, this bird is fast. You will be bleeding before you even realize you've been bit. And I was nervous working with him in close proximity with my fingers, and I was using protective contact through the enclosure that he was in. But once I felt comfortable through training and targeting and brought him outside of his enclosure, I trained in incompatible differential reinforcement of an incompatible behavior, where if I taught him a head target, and I'll do this with different animals for different reasons, but he can't bite my hand if his forehead is targeted to my palm. So that was one of the first things I taught him when he came out of that enclosure, and we're now beyond protective contact. And I still use this to this day because I did train it 7 years ago. I used a head target to teach him to keep his head high, why I targeted his toes to my fingers or to a nail file, because I needed to trim his nails, and I wanted to do, yeah, I could have just captured him and forced him to train to, or not to train anything, but to let me trim his nails. But I didn't want to do that because I know all the situations, all the behaviors, undesired behaviors it can reinforce in the process, or even make some of those stronger. So with you talking about DRI, I wanted to throw that up there real quick because I had it.
Awesome. I was thinking of some examples maybe of stationing. Again, like not a super obvious, correspondence with interventions with people, but it's very common for us to use like designated spaces as either like a safe space or a calm down area. And I remember you saying when I was up there, I think when I was up there at the workshop, that you had trained, I can't remember the pig's name, Milo, right?
Yes.
Milo, okay. That you had trained Milo to station. And I think Milo maybe got into where the birds were one day, or the birds got to where Milo was, and you were able to prevent something terrible from happening because you cued him to station.
To a station.
Like, that is so cool, and so such a useful thing. Like I can't chase those birds or whatever if I'm over here, staying where I'm supposed to be. I would say the example that is most similar for working with people is when we set up these areas where the individuals we work with are able to go when they need, a break or just time away from anybody else. And then all the other humans involved are trained to not disturb that person when they're in that setting. So if we're in a classroom and we have like a cool down area and the student goes to the cool down area, everybody needs to leave that student alone, or the cool down area isn't going to function in the way that we want it to. But it would sort of be like a station for them where they can go and remain there. And then that in itself is incompatible with the other things that they could be doing at that time that would be getting them, in trouble.
I love that. I love that a lot. And Dr. Evelyn Gould keeps coming. Do you know who she is?
I feel like we've talked before about.
Yeah, I had her on a podcast in my memberships. She's amazing, and she works with a lot of children with a history of trauma. And something that she had mentioned to me, because we can't protect these animals and these children from what's called life, because life is going to continue to happen. And she said something in there, in that podcast. She goes, when dealing with children with trauma, I don't try to change that. I try to teach them ways to cope with that. And I see that a lot with animals. Stressful situations are going to help, or are going to happen. I'm not going to be there. And that's life. You have got to get prepared for this. So it's important in these situations where we teach the animal, you teach the child. And I would love to hear more about what you have to say about this for successful for future for an environment that's not going to treat you the way that you're used to being interacted with me. So I'm going to set you up for success in those changing environments through coping, through different skills you can learn and take with you and practice for when and empower you for those situations, in those situations.
That's probably one of the hardest things to, like, because typical people, so to speak, have trouble with that, right? And especially I feel like whatever's going on in society these days, there's a real objection to real life, right? Like for whatever reason, it seems like people think, oh, I should have this way, or I should receive this because whatever. And it's just not how it works. So
Example, pandemic.
people have trouble with that. So it's very difficult because I feel like you first have to teach the consistency and establish some control within the environment of intervention, right? So that they're able to learn. And then that element of, uncertainty or unpredictability, you introduce that gradually and strategically within that controlled environment that way, and then they learn how to cope with it there. And then when it happens outside of that, it's not this totally unexpected, novel stimulus that causes a meltdown, or they have no idea what to do. But it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to work, to teach, and to teach successfully, for sure. Especially when you have, I would say, other folks in the outside environment that are sort of programming against what you're programming, right? So you're working with a student and you're teaching this, that, and the other thing. And then, the student outside of school is learning this, that, and that other thing. And now they have to, discriminate between environments, and it's very confusing, and it is tough. It is tough.
It's tough. And I'm trying to think of situations like we're talking right now. I can't remember who suggested this in the beginning, and I was like, that is brilliant. I don't know, it was Sylvia Kozerchuk. I know she recently suggested it. In our level 1 membership, we're talking about introducing a new animal with these 2 pigs in the house. Somebody got a kitten. And, yeah, that's what I thought too. I was like, whoa.
All right.
Somebody got a kitten, but I had heard of this before, and maybe it was Deb Jones that said, for example, she didn't say in this particular situation, but have the kitten be a cue, because we're talking about how are you going to introduce this kitten to these 2 big pigs in the house. So have the kitten be a cue, the sight of the kitten be a cue to the pigs, go to your stations. I think it was Deb that told me that years ago, and I was like, that's brilliant, and I'm trying to think of different situations with some of the exotic animals that I'm working with, like that, for example, this one particular primate has a history of being labeled as aggressive, and how do you put this under control, some type of stimulus control, when the public comes in and they're reinforcing some of this behavior? I suppose I could start teaching a cue to, like, this means run to your high station. You know what I mean? And then put that cue that when the public comes to the edge of your enclosure, run to your high station. To put as much different distance between, and then find comfort in being up there, and then the animal learns, I have control over this situation. This is how I'm going to cope with this former stressful situation. And now you have an empowered animal that understands that they can do this. They have control of this. They have choices, and they can do it when the teacher isn't there. And then carry that into other situations of your life. So you shape an empowered animal through slowly changing environments to set them up for a successful future.
I like it. It's it's difficult, right? Because I'm sure, for your example, I'm sure there's, signs posted, don't reach for the animals, don't feed, the animals. But people are still, for whatever reason, gonna behave otherwise. So, oh, look at that. That's great.
I didn't want to say, Nicole.
So like I see that with working with people where I'll tell a team of teachers, let's say, like, give this student an instruction in this fashion. And the teacher, for whatever reason, they have lots of other students that they're working with. Maybe they forget, whatever. They give the instruction in a different fashion, and then boom, student has a blow up. And it's not necessarily on the fault of the teacher for behaving in the way that they would behave that would be acceptable for 95% of students. Or even if it wasn't, let's say that the teacher was in the wrong, you're still looking at the behavior of our student being as the outcome that we didn't want for them. So planning for that kind, you can't plan for everything, and you are going to have, moments where the person or the animal makes the wrong choice, or there's something that is more motivating that is present there that's competing with your history of training, and they're just going to pick that. So while you tell people don't reach into the cage, you got a little kid coming in with cotton candy, and you've taught your guy to climb up to the top of the cage, but look at that cotton candy, like, that is really interesting and looks fun for me, so I'm going to go and grab it out of the kid's hand. So you're always going to have mishaps and whatnot. You can't plan and program for everything. And I think a big part on, especially working with, the youth with emotional disturbance, a big part of that is what we would say, is like forgiveness. But I've always looked at it as just like, what happened. Let's figure out why, and, plan better for the future. And also recognize that that's going to continue. We want it to happen as least often as possible, but it's not going to never happen. I think that's probably critical for animals too, and more so for on the part of the person, I think, working with them or whoever's training, to not take that as like necessarily like a failure on your part or the part of the animal, and just sort of recognize, like, if you did your due diligence, these things are you're still gonna have back steps, and to then not let that affect your future interactions, because that's right. That will then shape everything moving forward, potentially in a direction that you don't want it to go.
And there's been several situations where the environment did not play out the way I thought it was going to. So I just take those situations and learn,
Exactly.
How can I do differently in the future? And by some of the mistakes I've made have been my best learning moments, and it's through this time and experience. And I don't even know how long I've been doing this, but learn from your mistakes. Mistakes are not bad things, especially when they're not repeated.
Right.
Just learn from them. Bettina says, these are challenges we face at Rhode Island Parrot Rescue because we have over 50 volunteers interacting with our flock. Yeah, and Rhode Island Parrot Rescue is getting ready to visit us for a workshop in 1 week from tomorrow. So Bettina, I can help you with this because I work with a lot of groups, large facilities, organizations where you have numerous different people interacting, and how we can set this up for success. So I want to show, this is one of my favorite training sessions. I have numerous, but this is one where I was working with these two rats, Stella and Piper. And I used these foot targets. These are supposed to be dog foot targets. They're actually sitting in the back of my car right now. They're There are 4 different colors, one each color. But I decided to use these with these 2 rats because I was shaping the behavior of, and I gave information to the rest of the trainers. Teach the rats to target to your hand, pull them out of their enclosure on your hand, to prevent them from running up the outside of the cage. Because once you teach a person 2 + 2 = 4, you can't unlearn that. You know it works. So once the rat knows that when the cage doors open, it can run out up top. If it never learns that in the first place, and this is one of the ways we taught it. I taught it to start targeting its front 2 feet to this dog foot target. So when we got and this is me, I practiced it. I taught it inside the enclosure before they even came out. And this is where I had them out on a desk, and I was teaching them in a new environment. Every time your front 2 feet target to that foot target, I don't even remember, yogurt treats fall from the sky. And then teach a station where they stay there until cued to do otherwise. Then I ended up using this target when I had these rats running around me. I would grab this foot target and throw it in their enclosure and make a bridge with my arms, and they went to touch that target. And then I would deliver the reinforcer in larger sizes to redirect their behavior, from seeing, not from seeing, redirect their attention onto the yogurt. So while I closed the enclosure. So I didn't reinforce this charging out because they didn't want the enclosure closed. So I made it well worth their while to go in by teaching yogurt treats come in larger amounts when you go inside the enclosure. And then I hid them so they would spend like the next hour foraging for it.
That is awesome. That's awesome. That was one of the other things I came across when I was preparing for today, was how you can sort of use targeting to guide the animal to like relocate or to go from one place to another when you need them to be somewhere else. So that's a perfect example of that. And then I was thinking, like, using a target to have an animal maybe get into your car or to get into their crate. So it's just such a wide application for targeting as one of those just baseline fundamental skills.
Yep, and you can use numerous targets for numerous different things. We target big cats to put their ears up the side of the enclosure so we can get it in and get a sample. We teach giraffes to target their neck to a syringe for a jugular blood draw. We teach giraffes to target their feet to a stand for a hoof trim. And that's what I was showing with the photo of Milo. I don't know if I can find it, but that was teaching a target with duration. I was teaching him. That was really put my skills to work. It was a package of Venetian blinds that I haven't unpacked yet, but I was training him a nail trim. So I trained him to touch, because I needed his hooves to extend beyond, so I trim these. So I was like, how in the hell am I going to do this? So him just to target, and then I taught him to touch it and then move his hoof. So that way I could bridge when his foot was off the front and he started to move it back, and I was like, bam, right there. And that's how I taught him to keep his hooves right off the edge. And if you know pigs, you can't really trim their hooves with a nail file, but I was just getting started.
It's so cool to me to see you work with animals like giraffes or pigs or alligators, and knowing that the training methods that you use and that everything is positive and in the best interest of the animal. And it reminds me, like, I think I started in the field working with adults, like large, strong male adults, and I work much more often now with kids. So I'm thankful though that I started that way, because I have the perspective of like, I'm not making this grown man do anything, right? Like it's not happening. We're going over here. It doesn't work like that. So you have to be, creative and be able to use different styles of training to get the behavior that you want. So it's so cool to me to see when you work with animals like that are just obviously challenging by the nature of their physiology, but you're able to be successful with them. So super, super cool.
Well, thank you. And I learned so much from you as well. I mean, just discussing things with you and what happens in your environment, it does stick in the back of my mind when I'm interacting with animals, and I'll be like, I can see relevant, we collaborate really closely with the Autism Model School. We've also had just recently, which reminds me, I need to get back to that email. A school for people on the autistic spectrum wants to come in for a workshop. The faculty wants to come in for a workshop at the Animal Behavior Center.
That is cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. So Samantha, I would love to have the opportunity for you to sit beside me and train some alligators.
I was going to say, we're overdue for an in-person. We'll have to, we'll have to do our fangirl part too. We're like, Laura?
Oh, well, it's always so awesome to have you on here as usual. Thank you it's hard for me to believe already an hour has gone by. I would love to talk to you for a second after I end the live stream.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. And as I wrap this up with everybody else, thank you for attending. Thank you for attention for the past hour. I hope this has been of relevance to you. And I wanted to let you know, for those in the Parrot Project, don't forget, we have the Benefits of Tea and Animal Husbandry live stream happening this Tuesday night with Dr. Jason Crean at 6:30. Even if you don't have parrots, we use the teas with the lemurs. We're using it right now with a toucan. Be proactive, not reactive in your animal's health. Stay tuned, because we're announcing our fall workshops now, the zoo workshops. We expect these to sell out quickly, because they always do. And if you'd like more information on the work that we do, check out the animalbehaviorcenter.com for our workshops, Day with the Trainer, webinars, memberships, podcast, and what have you. And that, I want to say thank you, and stay tuned. Next Sunday, I'm going to live stream some training with some animal. I've got a week to figure it out, and I'm a procrastinator. Take care, everybody.
Take care.
Oh, I forgot to